Good evening, good afternoon, Christopher. How are you?
I'm doing well, John. Thanks for having me on.
All right, let's get stuck in. So I am 3 books in. I just finished Demon in White and very much enjoyed it. So I'm 3 books into Sun Eater, but there's still a lot of ground for me to cover. And so I'm wondering what do I have to look forward to in the remainder of the series? Kind of big picture without going into too much spoiler territory. What's the grand theme? And obviously there's the denouement at the end, which we know all about.
When all event, yeah. I think it depends on who you ask. If you ask certain of my readers, they'll say nothing. It's all very dark and scary from here. And they're not completely wrong. The series does get a good deal more grim for a spell in the near future. It takes a bit of that turn. But at the same time, the universe, the galaxy opens up. It gets a bit bigger, a lot stranger. It takes a turn increasingly for the Lovecraftian. There's been a little bit of that in particularly books 2 and 3, but that trend continues. But and things open up into sort of a more cosmic theater of war, alongside the more human versus alien, more grounded concerns. Try to do both, and there'll be some new characters, some returning characters, a little bit of a rotating roster there. So there's some of that to look forward to, and more of the same too. If you've been enjoying the like weird cyborg stuff, if you've been enjoying Hadrian and his friends, there's more of that. There's some new friends as well. So I this is more clear, I think, with the earlier books. Less so with like 5 and 6, but each one when I was starting out, I sort of treated it as having kind of its own like maybe side dish is the right way to think of it, but in terms of genre, the first book was like very much had this sort of sword and sandal like gladiator thing to it. It was also a coming of age story in its way. The second one was a lot more cyberpunk and like gothic in its way, and the third one had a bit of a political thriller adventure novel bent to it. And 4 has some of the cosmic horror we're talking about there, but it also has a bit more of that political thriller angle with sort of a dystopian bent to it as well. By the time it gets to 5, I think the Sun Eater flavor is sort of set in a way, and so the distinct kind of sub genre thing is not, I think, as clear. It's harder for me at least to put a finger on, because this was not something I would think about very consciously. It's something that would sort of emerge as I was writing the book and be like, oh, this one is different in this way. But I think certainly by book 6, I think the template for what this universe is and what I'm trying to do with it kind of sets in, and it becomes Sun Eater in sort of a like an alchemically pure sense, I think.
Okay, all right, very good. So I kind of hinted at it, but I think Sun Eater is unusual in that you essentially give us a massive spoiler on page 1 of book 1.
Yeah.
And even the name of the series is a giveaway. Did you when you wrote the first? I mean, I don't know what your writing technique is. Maybe we can get into that a bit. But when you wrote the first kind of paragraph of page 1, did you just have the end in mind, and then you had like this kind of acres of white page to fill, or did you have kind of the whole story arc kind of mapped out to a degree before you started, and you're kind of filling in the gaps? How did that work for you?
It was mostly white paper. If you've ever done one of those connect the dots drawings, it was more like that, because there were a few benchmarks along the way I knew I wanted to hit, but I wasn't 100% sure as to what order I would be hitting them in, or if it was possible to hit all of them. And mostly it has been. And so I usually will, when I get to a new book, I'll sit down and I will flesh out that book completely. I'll outline it in rather exhaustive detail. But I won't do the same for like 2 books out or anything like that. I'll have some like vague notions about where it's going. So I knew where I wanted to go with the ending. And so in a sense, I've been trying to untie a knot with both ends of the string nailed to the table, which has involved a lot of scissors and pretending I'm Alexander the Great. So I've been trying to solve that particular problem. But there's along the way, people think that must be like a really ossifying sort of like caging way to write a story, and it really hasn't been. I find that restraint and limitation are really good for creativity, because you have to figure out how to stick within the bounds that you've already drawn for yourself, and that find creative ways to sort of hold yourself into these boxes, and that's kind of fun. So like new ideas have come along sometimes quite late in the game. There's a whole section in like books 5 and 6, a whole thread that wasn't part of the plan, and it's become quite central. And you sort of discover that as you start taking things from little bullet points floating out there in white space towards something like an outline towards a manuscript. That's really where the creativity comes in, sort of one step at a time.
I've heard authors described as falling to a greater or lesser extent into two camps. There's a sort of architect camp who have everything sort of planned out, a blueprint for the book in quite a lot of detail, and then there are gardeners who sort of nurture it as they go. It sounds like you're somewhere in between, a bit architecty for the book that you're currently focused on, and then kind of gardening from a serious perspective.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I do broadly think that's a false dichotomy that we in sort of the reading community have fallen into, because the people who are architects like have to come up with the ideas at some level, right? They just come up with it a little bit earlier. They have a more deliberate process for
planners.
And like, there's a difference, right, between a French garden and an English garden, right? I may, I hope this doesn't get me thrown off the channel. I may be more of a French gardener than an English one, but in terms of the planning, but certainly I think, man, this analogy's gotten away from me. But you take the point.
I do indeed. Yeah, well, my garden's nothing to shout about. It's covered in weeds at the moment. So French is probably a good shout. Okay, so I am among the many things that I've enjoyed about Sun Eater so far, anyway, are the kind of hints at the deep history, the early days, the vanquishing of the Americani, and as a Brit, I'm kind of tickled that the British royal family might have been involved somehow, even leading that effort somehow, particularly given the rather lackluster nature of the current crop. So is there anything I know that there's a whole bunch of supporting material for Sun Eater. Is there anything in the written work so far that kind of explores that in any greater detail? Is that something that you might do at some point in the future?
I don't ever really intend to write like a full-blown series about that, because in a lot of ways, a lot of that is so close to our time that I fear that it would descend into like political, topical, whining. And I think it's better, and I think it's better as deep history, and is better being sort of broadly suggestive.
Legend,
and legendary, I think. But I touch on it a little bit in a couple of the stories, and in the later books to an extent as well. This gets elaborated particularly in Disquiet Gods. But there's a story I wrote called The Archinaut, the old sailor, right? That touches on this a little bit as well. I think it's in Tales of the Sun Eater 3. It's in there. It's a little bit of a time travel story with an asterisk that gets a little bit of a look at that. It's set much earlier in Imperial history, much closer to our time. I think it's like 3,000 years from now, approximately. Which is, we're talking with the series, we're talking like 20,000 years from now. So it's much earlier. It's the earliest thing I've written in the timeline by far. And so you can get a little bit more context with that story, but mostly it was an opportunity to experiment with a weird language shift thing that I was playing with, because I am not like a lot of science fiction authors. I don't have a lot of a very great technical background. I have a classics background, so I was playing with language instead of playing with quantum mechanics.
I like that there's that sort of deep past. And it's a little bit akin to Dune in my mind. That there with that sort of the vast history and the sort of great stretch of time. 20,000 years is a really long time. That more than encompasses kind of recorded history at this point in time. So I don't think we're really able to envisage what 20,000 years in the future really would be like.
No, and I don't pretend to. I always laugh when other science fiction writers start talking about their ability to predict the future, or create the future, inspire the future. It's like, this is like ultimately we're all so deeply wrong. Blade Runner.
I think it's wrong more often than it's right. Where are my flying cars?
Right, where are they? Right, I don't see replicants. I understand that the Blade Runner was 5 years ago. Where are our off-world colonies? Where is Pan Am Airlines? Exactly. We never seem to quite get it right. We give a lot of credit to Star Trek and the flip phone, but we don't even use flip phones anymore. So
not anymore. we're kind of past that now. A stopped clock is right twice a day. You know, occasionally someone's going to have a brain fart in a book, and it's gonna materialize. I think Arthur C. Clarke got quite a few things where I kind of predicted a few things, but
oh yeah, for sure. It's not impossible, but even when we do get something right, it's in the wrong context, or in the wrong proportion, or in some way.
And it's pretty near future as well. Usually, it'd be anyone's guess. Your daughter could probably have a pretty good guess what will be happening in 20,000 years and be no more or less right than anyone else.
Yeah, it's so remote from us that ultimately it gives you a lot of freedom as a writer to kind of do whatever you want, and that's what you want, or at least what I want as a writer, is to tell whatever I want, right? So
unencumbered, yeah, absolutely, and we want that too. Oh, I tell you, if you're referencing classics, I wondered if I'm going to skip ahead now to a different question, but the books that spring to my mind when you mentioned that were Ada Palmer's Terra Ignota series, which I think was out beginning of last year, or maybe end of the previous year. And I think she lectures classics, and so she and her books are set a few hundred years in the future, and there's a lot of classical references in that, to the extent that I felt like a real dunce when I was reading this. I just went over my head completely. I have no background in that at all, so I was like, what?
Yeah, I've heard that. I have not read them. I'm aware of them. I know she's also a big Gene Wolfe fan, which is cool. Gene Wolfe is my favorite science fiction writer.
Yes,
but that's cool. I think she's a Renaissance history professor, isn't that right?
I don't know, actually. I'm not 100% sure, but certainly I felt like she knew an awful lot more about it than I did. She was right, and it's a similar. I don't know. I want to say dense, but that makes it sound bad. It's kind of lush prose, and I feel a similar vibe in yours as well.
Yeah, I'll have to read them one day. I regrettably my fiction reading has dropped off as a consequence of writing all the time.
Yeah. Well, I guess from selfishly, long may that continue. But it's, to be candid, that series, book 1 was really good. Books 2 and 3 were kind of a slog for me, and there was a payoff in book 4, so I kind of felt both satisfied and relieved by the time I got to it. But yeah, definitely worth a read. Okay, so you are, I think, roughly speaking, halfway, maybe a little bit more through writing book 7 at the moment. Have you, to what extent have you started kind of noodling around what might be post Sun Eater?
Can
you tell us anything about it?
Only in like the broadest possible terms, because I haven't quite decided what the next book is going to be. I have a lot of different ideas, but I'm in this place in my life where I have a young daughter. She's just turned 1, and we're anticipating there will be more children in the coming years, and so I don't plan to jump into another gigantic series like this for a minute, and just because I think the bandwidth that I will have it will be a little bit more limited until grade school can start. So the next 4 or 5 years, I expect that I'll do smaller things. It doesn't mean a trilogy won't creep in there somewhere. Compared to what I've been doing, a trilogy is quite short. But I do think that what will happen next is that I will write a Sun Eater Universe standalone novel, because there's a different problem that I have too, is that I've written now 6 books, 3 novellas, some 24 short stories. And if you're a new reader and you're like, hey, this Christopher guy sounds cool, I should check out his work, you really have one place you could start, and that's Empire of Silence. And that means all these other books are, in a sense, gated off to you behind that first one. And I need to change that. So in like pure like corporate strategy thinking, I need to create new entryways into my work for people who maybe look at Empire of Silence and say, I don't want to read a 7-book series, or I don't like the pitch here, but like, man, kind of interested, of course. But like, maybe they.
Would you? And so sorry to interrupt you. Do you think then that a standalone or a shorter series, you would kind of, because you've got this very broad canvas now that you've created, would you default to setting it in the same universe?
Yes, that's my
corner of it or something.
Yeah, that's not all I want to do. But my sense is that if I can write a science fiction novel that would fit in this universe, then I remember I watched Jonathan Mayberry talking at one point, and he can't remember if it was online or one of the times I saw him. And he said Stephen King told him once that if you can do that, if you can connect your books, you should, because it won't matter to most people who haven't read both, but to all the people who have, they'll be very excited. People love that, so you should do it. And I figure if, Stephen King's giving advice, one ought to listen. And I think it's good advice. And certainly from a conservation of effort standpoint, right? It's hard inventing a galaxy once, like doing it twice is a lot of work. And so I think if I've got more space opera ideas, I'll try to slot it into the universe in some way. And of course, depending on when and where it's set, it could be quite different, right? In terms of science, in terms of the societies, in terms of aliens.
You've got
whatnot.
a lot to play with. Yeah,
even
to the extent of it being something that hasn't really been spoken about currently, you've got like literally an entire galaxy to play with. Yeah,
those ideas are very attractive to me. The ones where it's like not obvious that it's a Sun Eater book until the end, right? Or maybe it's never really obvious that it's a Sun Eater book. Those are interesting to me. I really enjoy. I'm a big Ian Banks fan. I really love Inversions, which is all set on this medieval planet.
Yeah,
there's like
one of my favorite books.
It's so good. It's deeply underrated in the culture books because it's sort of the
barely culture.
It's barely it's sort of the odd stepchild. But it's so awesome. I would love to do something like that at some point.
I've been doing a reread of the culture books, most of which I've read, I know 2 or 3 times in the past, but I've been doing a reread this year gradually, and Inversions is probably the one that I've enjoyed the most rereading this year.
It rose the most in my estimation on reread. The first time I was like, that's all right, but the second time I was like, this is actually awesome. My favorite's Use of Weapons. I adore that book.
That is a great book, and it's I'd totally forgotten. Am I getting my books right? Yeah, it is Use of Weapons. I'd totally forgotten the massive kind of gut punch twist at the end until I reread it, and that got me again.
Yeah, it's a rough one.
We shall say no more. Yeah, it was good. So you kind of hinted that you have a lot of time for reading science fiction, but do you read much yourself, or have you read much in the past when you weren't so sort of up to your elbows in writing?
Yeah, no, in the past, all the time. I grew up reading constantly, and I mostly grew up rereading because I had a weird experience with public library as a child. I got this book that looked like someone had bled on it, and I just it grossed me out so much that that I just never went to the library again. I was like, if this can happen, I'm going to buy new books. And that limits the amount of reading you get to do because your parents aren't going to buy you as many books as you can read, right? And so I would reread the books that I already had constantly. And then I made the jump to audiobook fairly early. I had the CD collection of The Lord of the Rings, and I must have listened to that 100 times in my life, and that's not a exaggeration at all.
I spent a lot of time in my local library. My father used to take me twice a week after work, and I would come out. I think you were only allowed to borrow 3 books at a time. I think it's much more now, but at the time it was 3, and I would kind of devour those in the intervening days and then take them back and get some more. So I did a lot of my science fiction reading as a kid out of the library, but I also reread a ton as well. And it's funny you say about audiobooks. When I was doing audiobooks as a kid, they were freaking suitcases full of cassette tapes.
And, I had a couple of those.
And the Lord of the Rings ones was almost literally a suitcase. It was huge. I don't know how many tapes there were, in excess of 40 tapes.
I had a couple on cassette. It was mostly CD, and even then, the Lord of the Rings was this big brick, right? But I did end up going back to the library for audiobooks. I would rip MP3s to my computer and then have my own copy, courtesy of the public library. Probably shouldn't admit to that too loudly, but that sort of became how I did a lot of my reading through high school.
I haven't I kind of lost the audiobook thing, although I did listen to quite a lot of things when I was younger, but I've recently I run quite a bit. I have a long distance running obsession, and I've recently found that I can kill 2 birds with one stone by killing an audiobook off while I'm doing that. And so I've treated myself to an Audible subscription recently, and I'm getting 3 extra books a month in that way. It's been great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. No, I love audiobooks. That was how I did a lot of my reading for sort of the middle period of my life. But then I worked for a publishing company. I worked for Bain Books for 7 years, and all of my reading suddenly was for work. which are still reading science fiction. You know, it's when I fell in love with Lois Bujold's books. I think she's genius.
It's funny. I spoke to Ken MacLeod. I don't know if you're familiar with him, contemporary of Ian Banks actually, and he was waxing lyrical about Lois Bujold's writing, and I had to confess, and I'll do the same thing to you, that I've only read Shards of Honor, and I didn't like it that much. Although just because it was a little bit kind of soft focus, lovey dovey.
It's the one that's
it gets
most
better.
like that. Yeah. I would recommend reading Warrior's Apprentice. So there are 2 books that are about Cordelia, right? But then her son Miles takes over in Warrior's Apprentice, and there's a run of those sort of in the middle of the series that is very much like late 80s new wave space opera, sort of in the same vein that early Banks is, and
sounds like
those are delightful. It's all those are so great. Later in the series, it goes back to being sort of more social comedy, romance, Georgette Heyer and space kind of stuff, and she's so good at that. They're lovely, but I much prefer the spaceship battles and
I have 6 or 7 on my shelf, so I will get to them. It didn't put me off, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought that I would.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Shards is one of the weaker ones in my opinion. I love them all, but I totally
so apart from the Vorkosigan saga, then is there anything else that you have managed to jam in recently that you'd recommend?
Recently, not so much. The last couple of years have been pretty rough between the baby and I think the last thing I was really into, and this was maybe like a year and a half ago, I read Declare by Tim Powers, which is a fantasy sort of spy thriller novel, which is awesome. Tim Powers is Tim Powers.
Did you write the Anubis Gate?
Anubis Gates, yeah.
I haven't read it, but I have it.
Yeah, Tim is a genius. He is. I always say this. I love writers that I'm not like, and I am not like Tim in that he does a lot of research. Right, all of his books are period pieces in some way, and he'll get interested in a period. Right, like in the case of Declare, the Cold War. Right, the Cambridge 5 was it? Those Soviet spies. And he'll read about that until he comes up with a weird fantasy idea and then sort of weaves it in there. And like Kim Philby's father was an Arabist converted to Islam and was a spy and like just sort of an occultist and like a weird character. And so he spins this whole story about the Soviets and genies and the Great Game and T.E. Lawrence out of his hobby reading. And that is like not my process at all. And I'm so fascinated by it. And he's such a tremendous writer. So I love that book.
Well, we're going to come back to your research process or not, as the case may be, later. Just in passing, you as we were talking about audiobooks, one of the books that I've read about half of, actually, I finished it in the physical format, but that was Demon in White, and the audiobook for that is really good. I think the narrator's done a really good job. I think we do them a disservice when we call them a narrator, because that just sounds like they're reading it. But it's more like a performance. I think those when it's done really well, I thought it was really good.
Yeah. I've been very lucky in that department. I think there are a couple folks who've done the UK recordings, but the guy who does all the American ones he's tremendous as well. I've been very fortunate that they've all put together these wonderful performances, done the voices, and all that. It's really fun.
I must have listened. I think it was the British recording that I would have listened to. I think I don't recall him being American, but anyway.
Well, they're all Englishmen, actually. Even the American recording is also an Englishman.
Okay. Well, maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
It's interesting that they're different in that case. Why would they be different? I guess
it's different companies because the publishers are different. They decided to do their own thing, and then it's all business contract stuff. You end up with different things like that. Yeah.
I'm not sure what I was thinking of when I wrote this question down, but we'll go with it anyway. So where did Hadrian's voice come from? Like, he's got a very distinct voice and tone. Like, how did you arrive at that? Did he arrive kind of fully formed, or did you have to kind of think through how he was going to sound?
I didn't think through it so much as I just sort of practiced. With character, I don't really think about character in great detail. I sort of this sounds very silly. I sort of feel them out, right? And I just have this sense of like who I want this person to be, and the voice kind of almost I think in the way that like actors like get hooks, right? You know, they'll whether for changing an accent or for understanding a character's mannerisms or something. You sort of have that when you create characters, right? You're like, oh, like this is the guy, like maybe he has this vocal tick, or like he has this like mannerism or something, and you latch onto that one thing, and you can kind of like grow the character around that. I have a sort of mental checklist of like recurring jokes in each volume that I want to hit in the same way that like, you know, the Star Wars movies all will do I have a bad feeling about this in some way or other. There's a joke in every book where someone misattributes a quote to Shakespeare, as people do, and they get corrected. And, you know, I want to hit all those benchmarks. And the fact that Hadrian is the kind of person who would go out of his way to do this is, you know, part of his character. And so there's, I have, yeah, there's a bit of that there, a bit of the artists too. And I do have some anxiety about the degree to which Hadrian's authorial voice is just mine and vice versa. And this is something I worry about every time I write a short story from another point of view. I'm like, is this just Hadrian in disguise?
Too much Hadrian.
Yeah. And you know, reader's mileage varies somewhat on that. Most people seem to think I've done an okay job getting away from it.
Yeah.
There are a couple people who will read it, some of the novellas, I think, particularly the first one, and say this is just Hadrian. And that may be true. That was, you know, that was the first one. But we'll see soon, because I need to have another idea and to move on. And so, you know, my hope is that the next novel will be third person, and I'll experiment with that for a little bit, and then.
Okay. I mean, this is stating the obvious, maybe, but decades and of subjective time, hundreds of years of actual time have passed. So he's grown up. He's a big boy now, and that's obvious in his journey, and I guess that continues throughout the rest.
Yeah, that was a very deliberate decision, particularly starting book 3, because the time jump was so much larger than the time jump between the first two. And not that the first one is small, but he really needed to have his act together in book 3. And so we see him in more of a mature role. He's got like his squire, who is sort of more like he was, and that distance, I think, was sort of useful. I always think of him as a new character in each volume, at least the version he's presenting, because there's been so much time. I mean,
so much has happened. Yeah,
I mean, we see this with, you know, people on the internet when they get in trouble for something they said 3 years ago. They're like, "Oh, you're fired." I'm like, I don't even believe that anymore, though. Like, that was high school me. I was very stupid, and people, you know, have no mercy. But people change so much in their own lifetimes that over several of our own lifetimes, you know, in this science fiction setting, they certainly would. And so
I found the time jump between Empire of Silence and Howling Dark a little bit jarring at first, and I thought, well, my first thought was, fuck, I picked the wrong book up. This isn't book 2. What's going on? And I know it is book 2. What did I forget something that I've read in the first one but no, I kind of got over it, and I was expecting something similar by the time I got to the third book, so I rolled with it at that point. But
it's sort of a mean joke that I played. I remember writing the outline for book 2 and deciding that Hadrian's love interest was going to change for the first bit of that book, and people would be like, "Wait!" And I think I wrote a note. It's like, "This will make people mad." And
I wasn't mad. I was just confused briefly.
Well, I maybe gave myself too much credit, but it was meant to be disorienting, just because it is disorienting for Hadrian, right? He's waking up from stasis. He doesn't know where or when he is, and so I thought the best way to simulate that would be to confuse the reader, which was like maybe too bold to move, because there are a lot of people who are like, what has he done here? But it sets the template, I think, for the rest of the series.
I think it's like having got through the third one, I'm sure something similar happens with each interval. But well, of course that happens. There's you know, you've got a big story to tell, and not a lot of space to do it. So where are we? So advanced AI, I've written down here, is literally the devil's work in Sun Eater world, in the Sun Eater universe, at least within the boundaries of the Empire. Do you think, back to predicting the future again, do you think that we are on a path to that now with freaking ChatGPT and its ilk? Should we fear our robot overlords?
No, we should fear the humans who control them. You know, I don't think I'm not so sure that strong AI in the Skynet Terminator, I have no mouth, but I must scream mode is really possible. But it's already dangerous enough, right? In the power that it hands to the people who wield it. That I'm very skeptical of it in the same way that I think we should be skeptical of power generally. You know, I just don't really know what to do about it. Genies have a like toothpaste have a hard time getting back into bottles, and you know, the technology is there already. I do find it darkly amusing. You know, for decades, science fiction writers have talked about how the robots will replace manual labor and all of that stuff, but creativity, that will be our advantage. And the first thing that the robots have wrested from us is creativity, and that in and of itself is a weird sort of devilish prank. And these things are going to happen regardless of whether or not we want them to. And so I can at least, you know, tell a story about them. And it
was one of the reasons I like to have, as you can see behind me, actual books. I mean, I do, you know, I do listen to audio books. I went through a Kindle phase years back, but I kept breaking the damn thing. So I decided that I preferred to own the physical asset, and I like the way that they kind of, I like the feel of them as much as anything else.
No, I do too. I still buy the physical books. I just usually the way I get around to reading them is through my ears.
I think that's true for me as well, increasingly. So
yeah, which is frustrating. It almost feels like it's a design choice of modern life to prevent us from reading sometimes. That is the thing that I'm concerned about. I mean, so much of modern life is artificial, right? Like, you don't actually own a lot of stuff. You know, people are doing subscriptions. I think this is the great trouble I have with Audible, is that if I were to cancel my subscription, those books that I thought I bought, I didn't, and they will be gone. And that gives me.
Is that right?
That is my understanding. Is that.
I hope anyway.
If the account goes,
I think if you buy it with like a credit, maybe that's true. But I think if you pay money for an audiobook, then it's yours. I think that's
true. I think that's true. I could also be wrong. It's been a long time since I tried to understand this. Because you know, I'm not getting rid of the account. They've got me. But I may be misspeaking. Right. In any case, I've often thought that Ray Bradbury was too optimistic when he thought the books needed to be burned. I just think, you know, all we have to do is go change the ebook files to say whatever we want them to say.
Just unplug it. Yeah.
I was rather appalled with what they were planning to do to Roald Dahl, I think, last year.
Oh yes, the niceification of Roald Dahl.
Yeah, he was not a nice man. Just leave it alone.
And you know, I read all of those books as a kid, and I read them all to my kids too, when they were of an age to do that. And
the meanness is part of the charm.
Yeah, definitely so. Yeah, and it's good when you're a kid to be exposed to that kind of thing, I think.
It's like a vaccine.
Well, I have 4 kids, and they're between 16 and 25 now, and they all turned out all right. Didn't do them any harm.
Yeah.
All right, so switching gears then. So most battles I like a bit of space opera, by the way. And most battles in space opera are kind of spaceship to spaceship or fleet to fleet. And your combat scenes, or at least quite a lot of them, are very up close and personal, kind of close quarter battle scenes between, well, essentially Roman legions and an alien horde. Do you do much research to get those to feel real from a? I'm saying to feel real from a military perspective. How the fuck would I know? But I have never been in the army, but they certainly seem realistic. Yeah. Does it come out of your tiny little head?
No. I did do a measure of research, not so much with regard to the military aspects, because I also don't have any military experience. I would be quite miserable, I think. But although I do know a lot of people who do. When I worked at Baen Books, a large number of Baen's authors are ex-military. People like David Drake, who I adored, passed away last year, I think it was. I think so, because he came
quite recently.
He came to my the release of Ashes of Man. It was the last time I saw him, and it was the first time he'd been out of his house since the pandemic started, and that meant a great deal to me. I I thought very much of Dave. He was a great man. And
I have Hammer Slammers on my shelves. I haven't got to it yet, but I will read it.
Yeah, those are good fun. His masterpiece is Redliners, which is really his attempt to come to grips with his experiences in Vietnam. It's quite a rough read in a lot of ways. But there are a number of other writers that I met who had some sort of military background or other Navy SEALs and CIA guys and stuff like that. So I would listen to them talk, and you pick up things just listening. But as far as like the actual like sword fighting and stuff, I have a fencing background. I have a little bit of a HEMA background, and I did boxing for a few years. I don't look at it at the moment, but writing all day will do that to you. And alas, but so a lot of the basic mechanics of combat is stuff that I just have personal experience with in terms of sword fighting and things. It's funny because you can it's one of those things you can't really adequately fake. I was reading a Tim Powers book, and it became very clear to me that Tim had done fencing, and I emailed him and I said, "Hey, are you a fencer?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, like years ago in college, 4 or 5 years." That was really cool because you can tell when it's there. But so I do research for this. You don't want to fake stuff that you don't have to fake, right? And especially if you're doing a lot of fighting in your books, you don't want to fake that. But
it feels very sorry to interrupt you again. It feels very visceral to me, and some of the fights are quite prolonged and drawn out, and it's like exhausting to read in a good way, if you know what I mean. It's not boring. I just mean it's intense, and I really enjoy those.
Yeah, I think part of that is that I just get really into those sequences. And there's some weird thing. A lot of writers complain of writing action scenes because it gets very hard for them. I find it becomes very easy for me to write when I'm writing action scenes because in a lot of ways, one action in combat informs the next paragraph because like you have to respond to it. And I find the writing becomes...
It's like a choreographed thing.
Yeah, it becomes very automatic in a lot of ways to write those sequences. And perhaps my editor could be a little more zealous with some of them, but
no, I wasn't saying that too.
No, I didn't think you were. I just, maybe. Sometimes I do think they go on. I'm like, man, I am having too much fun. But I also I chose to write them this way because I have some like knowledge deficiencies. I don't know a lot about submarine combat is usually the analog for space battles, right? I don't know a lot about that. Now I could do research or. This is a great story from the Punic Wars, right? The Romans were famously not a naval power, and the Phoenicians were. And they got a crashed Phoenician galley washed up on the shores of Italy, and they reverse engineered it. And they started training men to be oarsmen by digging trenches in the beach so the water would come in so they could practice sitting on logs because, they had to get the synchronizing together. And then they invented this thing called the Corvus, which was a boarding bridge with a spike on it that would clamp onto the Phoenician ships. So they didn't have to fight naval engagements. They could just fight the Phoenicians hand to hand. And it was this invention that turned the Punic Wars, started to turn the Punic Wars around. I realized there's an analogy to this in boarding actions and in space combat. And so why don't I just do that? Because I can write a sword fight. Now there's a little space combat, of course, in the books, particularly
talking of boarding actions. State this without giving anything too much away, but the lengthy scene in the first third of Demon in White, where they're boarding the world ship. I think it was a world ship. Was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, thanks. That was a really fun one to write. That's one of my favorite battles that I've done in the whole series. I'm very proud of that one.
Right, so I've just read the three books. I haven't read any of the novellas or short stories. So what am I missing? I gather there's quite a few of them.
So mostly what you are missing. Okay, there are 3 novellas to start with. There's the Lesser Devil, there's Queen Amid Ashes, and there's the Drgs Vampire. Lesser Devil and Drgs Vampire from different point of views. Queen Amid Ashes is a Hadrian story, and it's one that goes between books 2 and 3. That's probably if so you don't have to read any of the supplemental material, short stories, novellas, whatever, to enjoy the series. You could just read the books. Usually what these stories are is my elaborating on some of those throwaway lines. Hadrian will say, we did this thing at that place between books, right? Or between time jumps within a book or something like that. For those readers who would like to know what that was about, they can go read these things. If you're to read one, I'd recommend Queen Amid Ashes. It's the most substantive Hadrian appearance that's not one of the main books. It's written exactly the same way that the books are. It's just a fragment of events between books 2 and 3.
And am I right in thinking that Lesser Devil is that's about Hadrian's brother, isn't it? Is it Crispin?
It's Crispin, yeah. It's set in the time jump in Empire of Silence between his leaving home and arriving at his destination, and so that just sort of explores a little bit of Crispin's character, because Hadrian doesn't actually understand his brother very well, as so many of us don't. And so it's a sort of humanizing look at him, because I wanted to play with, we're dealing with this first person narrator, and I think that Hadrian is sincere. I don't think he's always right. I don't think he's unreliable. When people say an unreliable narrator, they mean a dirty liar, and I don't think that that's Hadrian's intention.
No, but he may not have perfect recall over many decades of experience.
Yeah, or a deep understanding of the people in his life necessarily, right? Sometimes the people closest to us, we don't understand why they like us or why they're around at all, or what their real feelings are. And this is something I'm really interested in, just in writing generally, is this sort of difference in perspective, and using the short stories and the novellas to play with that has been interesting, and also using them to explore like intertextuality, right? Because again, as a classics guy, you look at discrepancies in historical accounts, biographies of Alexander the Great or something, and you figure, like, what really happened though, right? And using the idea of canon in science fiction as a tool for sort of thinking about that, right? And because history is really a forensic exercise, right? It's like, we have some archaeological stuff here, but then we have this account here and this account here, and like this one might be fake or biased in this way, and like we have to get at the truth somehow. And forcing my readers to do that instead of just assuming that whatever I've handed them is canon, I think is more fun. And then I occasionally get to write short stories that are completely bonkers and have like no bearing on the truth at all. I wrote a story for special edition, I think coming out later this year, that just has Hadrian kill the main villain of the series, and it's like much earlier in the story. Like there's like a character that's his best friend that doesn't exist in the books at all. I just like to do stuff like that for fun sometimes.
Okay.
It's the history geek in me. So.
All right. Well, I will hoover those up at some point. As I've been reading through the first 3 books, I've had fun spotting possible influences on your own kind of ideas or themes that might have been borrowed from science fiction of the past. And am I imagining that, and to what degree is that deliberate, or is it just kind of the natural osmosis that comes from having read a bunch when you were younger?
You're certainly not imagining it. This is perhaps the most consistent thread of criticism that I get, particularly of the first book, where there's probably too much of it. But my intention always was to sort of digest the science fiction that I grew up reading, right? And we all do this as readers, right? We go through and we sort of we sort of look at this. We're reading books, and we do a couple of things. One of the things we do is we say, hey, that was really cool, but I would have turned left instead of right here, and I think that would have been cooler. And if you get enough of those left turns stacked up, eventually over time, you have a story there. But then also you do that too with the ideas the authors are trying to communicate. And you say, I see what you're saying, Frank Herbert, but I feel this way, right? I see what you're saying, Ian Banks, I feel this way. And you get enough of those, and you combine them with those left turns, and you arrive at a story. And it felt to me, at 17, 18, when I was writing Empire of Silence, that the right way to honor that thought process was to make the connection between my work and the work that gave me the idea in the first place very obvious. That felt like a citation, right? Like you would do in academia, doing it that way. I know. And it never occurred to me that people would feel that was the exact opposite. And there occasionally you get people who say, this is a ripoff, man. And I was actually like completely shocked and devastated when the first book came out, and a few people said that.
Well, I didn't think that at all.
No. I wasn't saying you.
Just to reassure you, like I say, I enjoyed. I've read a bit, not as much as I think I have. I think science fiction over the years. One of the joys of doing this dumb YouTube channel for the last year and a bit is that I have discovered, like I'm the first person, a whole bunch of authors that I'd never even heard of, never mind read anything by. That now I think, well, how did you never hear of them? But I would count you in that. But I think you knew enough for me to for there to have been an excuse for that. But yeah, no, it's a joy. And like I say, I enjoyed thinking, that sounds a little bit like that. And I didn't feel like
that was the intended response. Is I wanted people to say, oh, like this is a John Carter thing, right? This is a Dune thing. That's cool. Yeah. Like all the Emperor's bodyguards are all they're all raised on Mars, right? And so they're his Martian guard, right? And they all have names that relate back to John Carter in some way.
I hadn't noticed that.
I blur the spelling sometimes, but like that's like one example, right?
Yeah, so I would call them kind of more Easter egg than ripoff. I didn't think that at all. I think it's more a fun thing.
That was my hope, right?
Yeah, and I didn't think it was in the service of telling your story. It wasn't like you were telling somebody else's story. I think that's cool in the game. All right.
No, I always wanted it to just be, I wanted it to be fun. And I also wanted the book to sort of be in conversation thematically with these earlier books. Because we used to talk about the great enterprise of literature as the conversation, right? The great conversation. And like I had something to say, but I remember talking about Ian Banks, right? He wrote this essay, I think it's a few notes on the culture, where he talks about how once we get to space, it'll be impossible for there to be tyrants because you could just leave. And I'm like, Ian Banks, it's really hard to get to space, man. Like, it's really like, it's so hard. You could just prevent people from going. Like, this is I don't agree with you at all. I love you, but like that, what?
And hence your plebeians are planet bound.
Right. Yeah. That's a very conscious, not anti in a mean way, but anti-Banks sort of thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So you've referred to this. So you were a young guy. I might say precociously, outrageously young. In fact, when you were, because I was like in the pub at that age, getting shit faced with my friends. So you were like what, I don't know, 18, 19 when you were pitching Empire of Silence to publishers, maybe even younger than that.
When I was writing it, I started pitching when I was 21.
Okay,
it was finished when I was 21.
I'm curious to know, how long was kind of Empire of Silence kind of waiting to burst out of you? Like, did it arrive fully formed, or was it like a lengthy period of construction? Like, when did you start writing it down?
I knew I wanted to write books when I was 8 years old. That would have been around the time. So I was the right age for Harry Potter. Harry Potter, the first one came out when I was 4, and I was reading very, very early. So I read it when it came out. I had struggled with it. My parents helped, but I was reading it on purpose as I wanted to. And then I
had a similar experience, but I wasn't that age. I was reading it to my kids when it came out.
That's awesome.
So I enjoyed it. I'm a huge but interestingly, J.K. Rowling says that the whole 7-book arc came to her pretty much fully formed in a flash, and obviously not in the detail, but the soup to nuts kind of story.
I've heard her say that she like saw this kid on a train who sort of looked like Harry Potter, right? And she like seeing this kid, she had this moment. Robert E. Howard said much the same thing about Conan, that he just sort of like, in a sense, walked up to him across the Texan plains one day and said, "You have to tell my story." And that wasn't me. It was an accretive thing. I just knew I wanted to write because I like enjoyed those so much. And then Lord of the Rings, the movies came out right around the time I was starting to feel like I was a very big kid and I could move on from this Harry Potter thing. And so I made the jump to Tolkien and really never looked back. And then I finished Harry Potter, obviously, but like Tolkien became my guy very early on. I was obsessed with Lord of the Rings for 10, 15 years. I still am. There's nothing quite like it, but despite many attempts to be exactly like it. And that was what I wanted to do. But it became a science fiction project somewhere along the way. And I never really stopped working on a thing. But sometime, I think late in high school, early in university, it became Empire of Silence. And that last year in school, I was like, oh, look, I'm getting an English degree. What am I going to do with my life? Answer wait tables. I need to get this book finished, and I need to get an agent. I need to get moving. And several minor miracles that happened. I got an agent about a month before I graduated in 2015, and we sold the book a a month before I graduated. We sold the book a month after I graduated. And
well, so my next question was going to be, was it a slog getting a publisher to take it on? It sounds like it wasn't.
No, it was hard to get an agent. I spent about a year getting an agent. I was rejected 52 times. But once we got through that, getting the publisher was actually really, really fast. I was shocked.
I was doing some research recently on the golden age of science fiction, so going back to like mid 1930s to mid 40s ish, and the John W Campbell era, and quite a lot of the writers that he brought up were young guys in their early 20s, and but they were churning out some really visionary stuff, and it's called the golden age for a reason. But they were mostly young kids. Even John Campbell was only 26, 27 when he took on the editorship of Astounding.
He's a fascinating character.
Kind of flawed in some ways. But,
we all are, right? You know.
But lots of great change in the world has come at the hands of people that were kind of assholes actually, but had the drive to make it happen, and I think he was one of them.
Yeah, the thing about Campbell that's so fascinating, he's very unlike a lot of modern editors in a lot of ways, but primarily he was a real didact, which you kind of don't want in an editor, really, if you're an author, because he had a very clear sense of what Astounding's brand was, right, and what he wanted it to be, and if you didn't write that, he wouldn't publish it.
And there were a lot of really great writers that didn't get a look in, like Lee Brackett, for example, said that she would have starved if Astounding was the only gig in town. And wouldn't
work with him either. There were like a lot of writers who wouldn't work with him, but the ones who did, that were a good fit, right? I mean, when in a weird way, if you strip away like the big franchise brands, you strip out Star Wars, Star Trek, and you think of science fiction in its like platonic form, you're thinking of Astounding, whether you Mean to or not, because it had like this sort of overriding aesthetic and sensibility to it, right? The engineer heroes of the Golden Age and all of that, like the finned rockets and chunky robots. And
my formative years of science fiction reading were largely Isaac Asimov in short story form. I like randomly, my aunt gave me, I suspect lent me, she thinks, but I've not given them back yet 40 odd years later. But I've still got them, some collections of Isaac Asimov short stories from his early years, from the Campbell years. And they've got a little bit of commentary between each one about, how easy or difficult it was to sell the story to Campbell and what he thought of it. And those kind of autobiographical notes that I found fascinating then. I haven't actually read them for a long time, but that was mostly my introduction to science fiction was through that form when I was like 10 or something.
Oh yeah, no, and I find a lot of that stuff so fascinating because so much of the history of the field just doesn't exist anymore. It was just not written down. I've said this a few times. I have a friend who's on the Hugo Award Commission, older guy, and his name's Ben Yellow, and he met Campbell. His first Worldcon was Campbell's last one, and so he knows. He grew up knowing Asimov and Fred Pohl and Damon Knight and like all these guys, right? And he has all this sort of oral history that like almost nobody has anymore. And so much of like how the genre has been shaped, right, is the consequence of like not the stories themselves, but the politicking around the stories, the sort of business side of things, and almost none of that is remembered. And he was. He's been trying to like get as much of what he knows out, written down or on the internet in some way because it's important, and so much of it just is gone. We just don't remember these like little in jokes writers might have with each other, or that appear in their work, or that caused a story to be written. Because often, like writers will write stories out of spite, right? They'll write a story because they didn't like what another writer wrote, or because they liked it.
Like a call and response type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and those stories are interesting, right? The meta story of how the art gets made is interesting, and almost none of that. Is really remembered.
I read somewhere that I think it was Jack Vance. I could be wrong, but Jack Vance and Frank Herbert like had a bet. Or flipped a coin, and one of them got desert and one of them got flood. So Frank Herbert ended up writing Dune, and the other guy, I think it was Jack Vance, ended up writing a book about an ocean world. And that's how those things came to be.
I bet it was Vance because they were roommates at one point.
Yeah, that probably is true then. Yeah, I'm not sure. I really want to know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. There are hints of it in Demon and White. with Hadrian kind of reflecting on his kicking switch out of dodge or whatever. But is there any hope of reconciliation between those two, or is that
we'll have to see?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right then. So
one of the big questions. I get that. I get when is he seeing his dad again? Those are probably the two big questions.
Like I say, I probably didn't really want to know the answer to that, but
I'll spare you.
So this one is less controversial. So many of the political groupings / nations / geopolitical arrangements are kind of identifiable. So Mandaria kind of seem to be Chinese, Nipponese, I guess Japanese, Normans, I presume, kind of French. Where do the original Jadians come from?
They are broadly Persian, Arab, Mediterranean. They're sort of a weird mix.
Okay.
Their language is sort of a weird pidgin of Farsi and Arabic and Spanish. Because I thought that would be interesting.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. All right. So this is probably a little bit like asking you to pick your favorite child. I know you only have one at the moment, so that makes life easy. But you're of the Sun Eater books, the 6 published, 7th on its way. Which of those is your personal favorite?
It depends on how we measure them. The one I'm most proud of is just Quiet Gods, because it was really, really hard, and I'm glad that it's over. It took about 300 days for me to write the first draft, which is much longer than any of the others. There's a particular chapter in it that took me as long as the entirety of Drgs Vampire, my longest novella, to write. It just really kicked me in the teeth, and I had some trouble with my publishers as well during its writing that really complicated things. But I'm really happy with how it turned out, and it seems to be at least tying Demon in White for everybody's favorite book, and people really like Demon in White. So that's encouraging. So I feel very proud of it. But my favorite book is still Howling Dark. Howling Dark is the book that I developed my professional method on. Empire of Silence wasn't outlined because I was just noodling with it through college. But Howling Dark, they said, hey, we wanted another one in a year. And I said, oh no, I don't know how to do that. So I had to figure out how to do that and started outlining. And
how to be an author.
Basically. I had to really, as I say, level up to write that book. And I think it came out really well. I'm still very proud of it. I like a lot of the stuff in it. It's very spooky, which I enjoy. It turns out I didn't think I would be that sort of writer, but it turned out I was. And I really love all the Vorgosa stuff in that book. I really enjoyed. And I still feel there
was a fair bit of, just on the subject of spotting influences there. That felt a little bit Book of the New Sunish in some aspects to me. I thought of their sort of relics of tech and sort of buried things, and that rang a little bit of a bell. But,
I think Howling Dark is the most Wolfian of the 6 by a substantial margin. Maybe followed by 6, maybe. Wolf was a rather late influence. I hadn't read Wolf until after the first draft of Empire of Silence was written. I discovered him quite late.
Well, he was one of the authors that I referred to earlier that I said I'd never heard of. I confess.
Oh no, it's a huge crime that he's so.
I have read Book of the New Sun. I read that a couple of years ago, and like everyone else, I feel like I need to read it about 5 more times before I really know what's going on. I may never know what's going on, but my surface read of it was enjoyable enough, but I think I will get more out of it the second time.
Oh, it only improves. It's one of those books that that just gets better. It's my favorite work of science fiction. It's so tremendous.
So this is another question I'm not sure I want to know the answer to.
All right.
So you can plead the fifth if you want. So I really enjoy the relationship between Hadrian and Valka. Hadrian seems pretty well protected in the plot armor department. We kind of know that he lives all the way through because you tell us that on page 1. And Valka can kind of handle herself pretty well. But how worried should I be about Valka?
Don't worry at all. It'll be fine.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Say no more. So I think you've somewhat answered this already, but I'm going to ask it anyway because of the punchline. Do you do some research while you're writing your books, or does it all come from inside your noggin? And if you do, then what's the most interesting thing that you've learnt while researching your books?
So my research, such as it is pretty random, right? Because I love learning things. I'm a huge I'm a huge history guy. I like never stop reading about history, and so things sort of filter in constantly, and I'll come up with like a new place to slide some random fact in. I went through a phase a couple of years ago, and I was getting ready to write Ashes of Man, and then book 6, because there's a lot of Jadian stuff in those books, where I just like read about the particularly the Achaemenid dynasty, the early Persian Empire, but I read about the Sasanians and the ones between the Parthians and the Seleucids and all that, because I realized I didn't, for all of my like Greco-Roman grounding, I didn't really know much about their arch rivals in Persia, and so I went through and I just had the best time. Like there was just, so for whatever reason, Central Asia is a place that the American education system like never talks about. It like never comes up, which is interesting considering how involved we are there all the time.
Same here. We get a bit of Roman history because we were occupied by the Romans for a few hundred years back in the day, and we get maybe a little bit of ancient Greeks and a bit of Egypt randomly, probably just because of Howard Carter and Tutankhamun is probably a relic of that.
Yeah. The old Egyptomania still going strong.
That's it. Yeah. So I interrupted you there. So the Persian thing was the most interesting thing you learned. Okay.
That was the most interesting. I think one of the weirdest things that I learned, sort of randomly clicking through Wikipedia, is that the Jet Propulsion Lab, NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, was in part founded by an apprentice of Aleister Crowley's. There was like a wizard named Jack Parsons, who was like one of the early JPL guys, and he knew Robert Heinlein, which is like, this is how Tim Powers writes stories. Is he like finds these weird things and is like, that's bizarre. So that was quite strange. That there's this dark magician that like helped build rocket engines. I don't know what to do with that information, but it sounds like fertile ground for a novel somewhere.
Doing the dots. Okay.
That was a relatively recent discovery. I was like, oh, this is bizarre.
So this is the last question I have written down here. So I've heard you describe Sunita as science fantasy, and that's how I described Empire of Silence as well. I felt there was like a good balance between the two, and it was fun to read something which is kind of notionally a space opera that still has kind of, as you say, swords and sandals and gladiators and shit that you would normally, and a coming of age and a dynasty and all that sort of jazz that you normally associate with a fantasy, a sort of epic fantasy novel. So it was fun to have the same mashup. But to me, the others so far, anyway, the ones that I've read are out and out space opera, admittedly with some trimmings. But I'd be interested to know what do you see as the fantasy elements in the other books?
I think
have I got that wrong?
No. I think the big thing that makes me use that label is the way the books are written, sort of stylistically. I think that this is, if you are a fantasy reader, a very friendly science fiction series for you to read. There are more fantasy readers than there are science fiction readers. It's a much bigger market. And there's this perception that science fiction is hard, that there isn't about fantasy. People are more scared to read science fiction than they are to read fantasy.
And it feels like schoolwork.
Yeah, I think it's the technical bent, and they think maybe I'm not smart enough to understand this quantum whatever, and the answer is no, nobody is. It's fine. But I decided to write the book in a way that would, I think, be very familiar, very comfortable to people who are more used to knights and castles, like on a prose level. I think I don't tend to go on for pages about how the spaceship works, really, right? I'm a lot more.
No, I might like it if you did, but that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I've got some more of that, I promise.
That's my science background. But the kind of chronicle form is much more commonly seen in fantasy as well. That kind of I'm telling my story from a position, as far as the tale's concerned, in the future, and we're telling it backwards. That's not uncommon, I think, in fantasy.
Yeah, and so it was sort of a cynical marketing move on my part to write the books this way, because I figured, I tried really hard to get because Dog will put fantasy or science fiction on the spine. I tried to get them to count it as a fantasy book to trick the booksellers into putting it into the more traffic aisle in the bookstore, but they didn't listen to me, so I didn't quite win that battle. But it was with the intention of trying to reach more people this way, because I observed that Star Wars is more watched than Star Trek is, and I'm not saying that Star Wars is better or more scientifically accurate, but it is more watched, and so I wanted to try and sort of angle myself in that way. So that was sort of like the big sort of macro decision. But as far as micro elements, I think as the series progresses, I think it becomes a bit more fantastic as we start to deal with that more cosmic scale I was talking about.
Right.
It's pretty grounded in terms of its the relationship between man and technology and man and nature in the earlier books, and that starts to abstract itself in various ways as the series goes on.
I mean, in the last couple of years, I've been mainlining science fiction, but I've read my fair share of epic fantasy as well, including, of course, Lord of the Rings, and so I felt very comfortable because it's got everything that I like about a sort of broad brush, not broad brush, an epic sort of broad canvas space opera. It's got all of that in spades, but then, as you say, it's got some things that will be familiar to anyone that mainly reads fantasy.
I hope it works for everybody. Obviously you run the danger of making something that works for nobody, but so far it seems to be going according to plan, which is a great relief.
Yeah. Well, good. I'm gonna let you get on with your day, and I'm gonna go and have a glass of wine and talk to my wife. But thank you very much indeed for your time. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. I'm gonna grab the next book. I've got it on my shelf up here somewhere. Probably in July. I think I'm going to take it on vacation with me, and I'll burn through that in no time at all, I'm sure. And then I'm really looking forward to getting my mitts on the broken binding editions of the hardbacks later this year. End of this year, beginning of next year.
So the first 3 are coming out this year. My understanding is that those will go on sale towards the end of the summer. I want to say around August, with the goal of shipping before the end of the year. So you should have them this year.
And I'm on the wait list for their science fiction subscription service. Do you know if it's going to be sold to like regular punters, or is it only for subs?
No. Well, they're printing a lot. They're printing at least 3,000 sets.
Yeah.
Well, there's been this dearth, particularly. So the U.S. my publisher fixed this, and they started reprinting the hardcovers. But my UK publisher has not had the first book available in hardcover since 2018.
They're rare as rocking horse shit over here. You just can't find them. I very much like to have them, but I've given up even that being a possibility. So I will nab the broken binding ones for sure, assuming I can get my hands on a copy. But
so they won't be limited to the subscribers. My understanding is that the subscribers will have first crack at a subset of however many they're printing, and then that'll get pushed down to people. There was an interest form that was going around.
They signed it.
Okay, good. Then you're like tier 2. Anybody who signs the interest form will get the second crack, and then there's a third batch that they're putting out for general sale. So even if you didn't sign the form, and you still can, they tweeted about it. It's on their Twitter page. Even if you didn't do that, you'll still be able to get a copy. Still have a chance to get a copy, I should say. But they may even be printing more than those 3,000. They were telling me, Patrick was telling me, they had something like 5,000-6,000 people already sign it. So they may be printing more, and I think GoLanx is perfectly happy to do that. So,
yeah, why not?
They have literally nothing to lose and everything to gain by doing so.
Yeah. Well, I shall look forward to that immensely. I've got a couple of their editions of other stuff, and they are very pretty.
They do lovely work. So these are going to have they'll have a reversible dust jacket. There's going to be 2 covers, one by a gentleman named Peng Lu, and one by Renee Eigner, who's done work for them before. He's doing the Malazan books, and then they'll have board art on the physical boards of the book as well. There'll be a sort of a third cover there, and then there are 2 separate end papers, one on the front, one on the back, and then the pages will be illustrated. So there are effectively 6 pieces of art per book. The text is exactly the same on the inside. It's the same pages as the GoLanx edition, with a new introduction. But otherwise they'll be identical to the normal editions. But very excited about those. It has been great fun to put together. Working with Patrick and Matt and the artists has been very fun.
Yeah, I follow Patrick on Twitter, so as well as his channel. So I've seen some of the sneak previews of the art. I think it was from Howling Dark. I think the first one I've seen.
Yeah, we're putting out one preview a week every Friday until we've shown everything, I believe is the plan now.
Well, it's good news that they're coming out in August. For some reason, I thought they were it was near the end of the year, but I don't know where I got that from.
Yeah, so, I think that's right. It may get pushed back a little bit depending on printing.
That could be for the subs, maybe, but we'll see. Okay, well, anyway, whenever they come out, I should be bagging a copy of those. And
I hope I've not misled you. I think the gating factor may be my having to sign 10,000 books, which I'm terrified of.
So will you have to sign them all?
That's the plan. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah, they'll send me the title pages. They won't send me all the books. Thank heavens. But that'll take a long time. So
yeah, I imagine it will. Yeah.
I'm not looking forward to it.
Start limbering up your signature. Oh,
yeah, I'm stretching. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, let me let you go. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed speaking to you.
Yeah, it sounds like a plan. John, it was a delight. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, welcome. And I will wish you the best of luck finishing book 7. And
thank you. I need all the help I can get.
By the time it's out in paperback over here, I'll probably have finished the others, so I can get straight into it.
Awesome.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.